When we think about sites, what we find is that they come in several different sizes and scales. And so you have some small temporary campsites, probably like the where we started out, and some somewhat longer-term sites that are a bit larger, and then you've got really big sites. And this is one of the really big sites. We call it the Plymouth Street site because Plymouth Street is up there. It was discovered in that initial MAS survey back in the 40s, but then not much was done here until the late 1970s, early 1980s. Now, at that time, there was a group of amateur archaeologists that called themselves the South, let me see if I can remember this, the South Shore Archaeological and Mineralogical Club, centered in Weymouth and areas like that. And they were very interested in the whole idea of waterways connecting sites that we were talking about earlier. And so some of their members came down here, specifically William Halloran and William Cashotlow, and they began excavating in this area. And by this area, I mean the whole peninsula on which we are just on the edges. Now, at that time, already this property was being used for a gardening sales area. There were mulch piles, there were piles of wood chips, and they were sort of working one step ahead of the destruction. And yet they managed to excavate a number of pit features, which were very large pit features, which contained wealth of stone tools. And in particular, one of the things the Taunton River is known for in this region is for the occupations that took place toward the early end of the spectrum, what archaeologists refer to as the early Archaic period, which is simply a pair of terms that mean old and old. But we use these terms and we know what we think they mean. We're talking about a time frame from around 9,000 to 8,000 years ago. And one of the types of tools that characterizes that period is a type of hunting point. These are not bows and arrows yet. These are probably being used by throwing sticks, or what we call atlatls. And they have a kind of pair of lobes at the base of the point that sort of stick out from the bottom. And therefore we refer to them as bifurcate base points. Both at Titicut and Fort Hill and Bill Taylor's site, that this was a major center for that period. So is this site. And one of the things that we have at this site, which they don't have down at Titicut, is an associated radiocarbon date of 7,980 plus or minus 280 years from one of the pits that Halloran dug. So that is when it should be. During the mid-1980s, Halloran kept on digging here for many, many years. He even camped out here and worked in the woods around here. During the mid-1980s, for several summers, I brought students out from the public archaeology concentration at Bridgewater State for summer field school, and we worked at this site. And for the benefit of the two of you who've worked at the Little League site for the past couple of years, the soil here is very fine sand. It goes through the screens like butter.
Oh, this is that
site. This is that site, yes. And so it's very easy digging. And it's a very productive site. It was not only occupied during the early Archaic period, but from that time onwards, sporadically, up through maybe the early woodland period, so up until maybe 2,000 years ago, and maybe even later than that. So this is sort of a natural, obvious place to be. And, we'll take a look, however, we'll go up there briefly, at what has happened to this site, because most of it has been destroyed by the wood chip operation. we made a deal with the owners of the land, kind of a devil's bargain. They were unwilling to give us title to what we found. Private land, what's found on private land, the landowner can keep. But they did agree that the artifacts would never leave the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Because you know what happens if people get collections and then they sort of shift them around, is they wind up on eBay and they get sold without their documentation, and then their information value is lost forever. And I can't tell you how many collections we have in the Robbins Museum in Middleborough where the only information we have on them is it came from Plymouth County, or worse, Massachusetts, or worse, New England, or worse, we haven't the slightest idea. So that is one of the things that we want to have, because the information from this site was dug carefully in a grid, the way you see on, when you see archaeology being done on the tube. Items were carefully mapped in. If we go far enough, we might actually find the remains of our previously excavated squares on it as well. One of the things that was found right about where we are, or maybe just a little bit down that way, by Halloran and Cashotlow and their associates, they found a couple of gouges, which are woodworking tools, and a couple of adzes, which are also woodworking tools. And the gouges were like, okay, more or less where McHale is standing, and the woodworking tools were more or less where I'm standing, and there was another set of them, 2 of these, 2 of those. Now, as I said, organic materials do not preserve well in the soil, but the alignment suggested to the excavators, and I agree with them, that these were canoes. And that these were items that were in the canoes that were left here for presumably later use when they never came back.
I had no idea.
So this is kind of depressing, but I mean, I'm wondering if there's some of the sites still there. I'm curious to walk over that way and see if any of it is still left, because as I said, we spent a couple of summers in that patch of woods over there. Excavate. But his initial excavations are out in the flat area over there, which is now completely gone.
Is it gone just because it's buried with stuff? Or
No, both. Both.
Does he look for any artifacts when he goes through there removing the dirt? Does he look for any artifacts?
Well, but you see, the problem is there wouldn't be any context to them.
Yeah.
You know, what you want to find is the artifacts in context. So the 7980 date, for example, was found in a pit feature with 2 bifurcate points and a host of quartz scrapers and knives and all kinds of other stuff. That's what we call context. And so there you can kind of reconstruct the behavior of the people. That's what we want to do. Because pretty much all of New England was plowed. But below the plow zone, which is, maybe this big, you're getting undisturbed cultural deposits that have been there for as long as 9,000 years. And it's a shame that it got blown away, but at least we have some of the information available. And again, this is one of the largest base camps in the entire upper Taunton Valley. And it's here precisely because this is where the rivers come together. Now, there is, in fact, another site located across the river on the high ground there. The very first year that I came to Bridgewater in 1978, under rather peculiar circumstances. You all remember the blizzard of '78?